Hello, hello, hello. Welcome everyone to Wednesday's show of the Black Brain Trust. Today is Wednesday, September 5th, 2018, and today is Geopolitics. We're going to have a good show for you all tonight. Good things on the docket tonight that we're going to go over. As you all know, our Geopolitics show is normally a good show. Today, you're one of your co-hosts, Lionel. I'm here with my other co-host, Mike. How you doing today, Mike?
I'm good, brother. Yourself?
I'm good. I'm good. And also on the panel so far we have MOT, Man of Tomorrow. How you doing today?
I'm doing all right, man. This is a great podcast and a great forum for my brothers.
Roger that. Roger that. Let's go ahead and get to the show. Our first topic on the docket is from Reuters.com. Title: U.S. tariffs cast a cloud over Huawei's solar electronics launch. Written by John Benny. All right.
Huawei.
Oh, Huawei. You said Huawei.
Hua,
Huawei.
Hua, Huawei.
Huawei. U.S. tariffs cast a cloud over Huawei's solar electronics launch. Excuse me. Huawei's technology company's coming U.S. launch of solar panel control device is expected to collide with the new Trump administration tariffs on Chinese electronics, undermining a product that analysts has said has seen as challenging rivals on pricing. The Chinese company, best known for its smartphones and telecommunications equipment, has developed a new generation of low cost solar inverters which convert, manage, and monitor energy produced by solar panels for home use. Huawei has said it was aiming to roll out the product called Fusion Home in the United States before the end of the summer, a year after its original target. Analysts and distributors had expected it to knock $100 to $200 off current market prices of similar devices costing between $1,000 and $1,500 per household. But a coming 25% tariff on Chinese electronics that would overturn much of Huawei's expected price advantage may have may have stalled talks with US installers and distributors, said analysts and research firms. Huawei will either have to reduce its margins or raise prices, they said, potentially benefiting rival producers, including Solar Edge and Enphase Energy, which are ramping up manufacturing outside China. Huawei declined to comment on tariffs and did not respond to detailed questions from Reuters on the current status of Fusion Home. Company spokesman Joe Kelly said in July that the company was planning to introduce the new product to its partners in the United States this summer, and that the timing of the rollout would depend on those distributors. The 25% tariff, if implemented, will take effect August 23rd, and analysts covering the sector say it will affect the new Huawei product. Uncertainty Its certainty would eat into profits and is just a question on how aggressive Huawei wants to be, said Cohen and Company analyst Jeffrey Osborne. Okay. On Huawei foray into the high margin residential market comes after panel installations failed in 2017 for the first time in 7 years. GTM Research recently cut its forecast for 2018 residential solar market installations by 8% to 2.2 gigawatts. Of four major solar panel makers Reuters talked to, only Utah-based Vivint Solar confirmed it was considering adding Huawei inverter to its lineup. SunPower Corp and Tesla's Solar City did not respond to Reuters' requests for comment. A Sunrun spokeswoman said the company welcomed new innovations that made solar energy cheaper and more accessible. A 25% tariff could eat up the margins of post competitive Chinese manufacturers and potentially change the player landscape of the U.S. solar inverter market. Just another analyst, Eben Freeman Dahl from Rystad Energy. All right, so August 22nd has passed already, but Trump's tariffs are having obviously an effect on the Chinese economy. And also, we spoke in past shows that his tariffs are also having an effect on American economy, such as we went over the soybean market in Midwest. Um, with these tariffs and with these tariffs, what more looms on the horizon that could be affected with these tariffs, both on the Chinese side and the American side?
Well,
Well,
oh, go ahead.
I think it's important that we that people who listen to this understand that Huawei is a Chinese telecom. They are a how they came to power. The backstory, real quickly, is that they siphoned all of the intellectual property and technology designs from a company in America, in North America. Um, I forget the name of the company right now. I want to say it's Nortel, but they siphoned all the they infiltrated this company and took all their designs and all the intellectual property and basically bankrupt the company. And in that, they merged with another company called 3Com, which is an old American company. 3Com used to make Ethernet adapters and Ethernet equipment for networks. Um, they then copied the designs from Cisco, even down to the bug level, and replicated these products and created network switches and routers and other telecom communications equipment and sold it for less on the market than what the competitors were. And then they merged. They were acquired again by HP and became H3C, which was Huawei 3Com communications. And then basically, Huawei is a communications arm of the Chinese government that has the capabilities of um, basically listening to traffic. So we know that in the African Union that they were using this equipment inside the new African Union headquarters, and they were listening to African leaders discuss matters, or African ambassadors discuss matters inside the African Union, basically eavesdropping on them. So this is why they're a high target for sanctions and tariffs.
Hmm. Go ahead, MOT.
Pretty much people don't understand that through the ability of allowing people to think that capitalism should run government, previous to the comments that were stated, that they were able to come into businesses and take them over. All businesses who had government contracts at that specific point in time, they were able to just co-op everything that they were talking about. Like these companies who we're talking about, they had contracts with the FBI, CIA, had contracts with intelligence agency across the world, with the U.S. backing because they got to start here in the U.S. And that's what happens when you allow capitalism to control commerce rather than national security to control commerce. Now you can't really do anything because most of the people with top secret clearances work for this company.
Mm.
They could just quit the CIA tomorrow and go work for this company tomorrow and make 6 times the money. And there ain't nothing you can do about it, or I can do about it, because they're in that deep into all this stuff. And like people think that, oh, these people, they're not going to, dude, you have mostly veterans who are doing this. We're not talking about people from the South who claim they're patriotic. We're talking about people who have made the most amount of money possible off of a situation off of this. This is the problem. Like, once they get down to the nuts and bolts of how Russia hacked the election, mostly military veterans were behind that. And I'm going to say that again. Mostly military veterans were behind helping Russia swing the election for Trump. But they can't really talk about that because they'll lose their tax cuts if they were able to talk about it really. This is why everybody have this eyes blind, wide shut approach to China. Because China is doing the exact same thing that Russia did, except for they didn't try to influence an election. But they're doing everything else outside of that that is way more important than influencing an election by taking over intellectual property, going into these schools, getting the best of the best and hiring them, sending them over. Like, this is all the things that we used to do to other countries. Now they're just doing it to us, and we're just letting it happen because we want a certain amount of people to win in this society. It's bad. And it just takes like a really political re education for people to really know how this is a actual threat to us, far more than what's out there.
Now, from what you said, capitalism is. Hopefully, people understand what capitalism is. With capitalism, the Chinese, what they did was start a company here in America and basically found some type of way to steal the intellectual property of American companies,
Correct.
then make the same product but cheaper in China, import the products here, bankrupt those companies they stole the intellectual property from, then cut deals with the government in terms of installation and things of that nature. So that was the whole game.
It was.
Mm.
That's you did not describe it any further than the actual threat that it is.
And because of the rules of capitalism, they were allowed to do that because
That is
per
correct.
capitalism, if you are able to make, well, with capitalism, you need a lower class, and the Chinese labor was the lower labor class. They were able to make
At the time.
more product, the same product at a lower rate, but even make more, and other company couldn't out could not compete with that.
Yeah, I mean, just think of cotton shirts in the 1800s. We were the lower class of black citizens who could create cotton shirts for the rest of the planet.
Hmm.
It's no different, way no different than what they have done in our country. And they were able to do it with the same, because capitalism is the state of democracy right now.
Hmm.
Like, no one came out to stand at the gates of Amazon, ExxonMobil, Verizon Wireless, any of these other people who are not Comcast, who are not paying taxes on any of the anything that they do in our society. But somehow they were able to convince the entirety of the populace to not focus on that or concentrate on that and just blame everybody else for the taxes that they should be paying. This is why me as a business person, I think anybody should be jailed in our country for talking about tax cuts. Period. Across the board. Because when those people got those tax cut, ExxonMobil, like, they don't pay taxes as it is. And they got like rebates where they get $3 billion and $4 billion a quarter from the federal government, even though they don't even pay taxes, but they just increase the amount that they take back from the federal government. Meanwhile, people can't get health care and all that other stuff. So it's just what we complain about and why. And the news media is 100% okay with tax cuts because they're coming to them and the people who are on TV. It's kind of like a purposeful blind spot that the media is purposefully letting go through for a windfall. And I don't think that that should happen.
You got any comments on this, Mike?
Just one slight disagreement about Russian hacking, but I don't think that's nothing that we should
Okay,
we can
okay,
discuss that offline.
Okay, all right, no problem.
all right. Let's continue to the next item on our docket. Excuse me. The next item on our docket comes from CNBC.com. Title: Iran's reaction to U.S. sanctions could cause an unintended military conflict, says RBC's Halima Croft. written by Holly Elliott 17 hours ago. Iran's reaction to the reimposition of U.S. sanctions in November could lead to some kind of unintended military escalation, a risk currently underappreciated by markets. RBC Capital Markets closely watched oil market expert Halima Croft said on Wednesday. We maintain that Iran's response to the coercive measures will play an important role in determining the potential upward trajectory of prices, Croft and her team of oil analysts said in a note Wednesday. The note titled Winter is Coming warned that if the Iranian regime restarts its nuclear program, increases support for regional proxy groups, or makes a genuine effort to restrict maritime traffic through vital choke points, fair price premium calculations will become of paramount importance. RBC Capital Markets' base case scenario is that Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, will opt for an approach of contained escalation and will seek to avoid a direct military confrontation with its regional rivals, like Saudi Arabia and Israel, and that support the U.S. sanctions. Still, there's a risk that any retaliatory measures could get out of hand. An unintended military escalation through miscalculation continues to be one of the most underappreciated risks in our view, Croft and her team warned. Even if the probation, Even if the probability of such a scenario remains relatively low, it will serve as the ultimate high impact event for oil prices. The type of Iranian provocation will matter materially for oil prices, RBC's team said, as will the reaction of power rivals such as Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the US. If Tehran opts to avoid escalatory measures and attempts to wait out the Trump administration, the impact on oil prices will be more muted and largely limited to how many of its barrels are removed from the market by sanctions. Croft's teams, including Christopher Lowney, Michael Tran, and Megan Shipman, wrote, emerging market currencies have succumbed to yet another sell-off with, with some hitting record lows as concerns rise about potential contagion across multiple regions. Sanctions on Iran's oil industry are being reimposed by the U.S. on November 4th after President Trump's decision to withdraw from an international nuclear deal. They will severely impact its oil industry, port operators, shipping sector, and petroleum related transactions. They follow a first series of U.S. sanctions imposed in August targeting other Iranian sectors. The U.S. has warned other countries that they too will be hit by secondary sanctions if they buy Iran's oil. The sanctions are expected to lead to export losses for the Islamic Republic that surpassed 1.2 million barrels a day during the first quarter of 2019. Beyond the barrel loss and the tightening fundamental backdrop, we think oil's fair premium could stage a comeback depending on the Iranian response, Croft and her team wrote. Aside from Iran, geopolitical events affecting other oil producers, notably Venezuela, Nigeria, Iraq, and Libya, along with Algeria, they are known as the Fragile Five, could also impact global oil supply and prices accordingly. We started the year warning that the economic and political crisis in Venezuela could cause its production to plunge by close to 1 million barrels per day in 2018. We now anticipate that the snapback of U.S. sanctions could take similar volumes of Iranian exports off the market as the year comes to a close, Croft said. These two producers alone represent a very real supply gap risk of nearly 2 million barrels, and we continue to caution that an additional 500 K barrels a day is credible at risk for periodic outages in Libya and Nigeria, as the security situation in both countries remains fragile and upcoming elections could bring additional unrest. With oil supply disruptions a distinct possibility. Market analysts are questioning the capacity of other major oil producers like Saudi Arabia and Russia to step up production if there are outages that prompt a sharp rise in prices. Saudi Arabia is viewed as the holy holder of significant spare capacity in RBC's view. But Croft noted that although it has ramped up output by more than 280,000 barrels a day since May, questions remain about how much more output it can easily bring on and about its willingness to risk another contraction in prices given its own domestic revenue requirements. All right, title again: Iran's reaction to U.S. sanctions could cause an unintended military conflict. All right, who wants to comment on this one?
Well, we saw what happened in 1940 um, when the Americans cut off the oil access and logistics access to the Japanese. You ended up with Pearl Harbor almost 6 months later after that. So what the article I think is basically saying is that playing around with Iran's ability to survive will force them to force their hand militarily. That if diplomacy doesn't work, which is what the JCPOA was about, the JCPOA is the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action on the nuclear development inside Tehran. If you force their hand and they've already complied, then you give them no other chance, no other option other than to strike back militarily. And we know we have bases inside. I think the Fifth Fleet is inside Doha, inside Qatar. So makes the United States very vulnerable from a military standpoint. That you have these bases that can easily be hit from short to medium range ballistic missiles. And the latest news in the last 24 hours is that Iran has put ballistic missiles inside Baghdad, which can reach any part of Riyadh, Doha, as well as Tel Aviv.
Okay, let me bring up the map. While I bring up the map, I want to say hello to Jack. How you doing today?
I'm doing well, brothers. How y'all brothers doing?
I'm good.
Hey, Sapase, Mambule, my friend.
See what I got bien. All right, so my thoughts on everything is I'm just want to know from your perspective how much this will affect across the board economically. I noticed that China's been kind of withdrawing from sales of buying oil from I think from U.S. So I know that's going to disrupt the market. Not from U.S., but I'm not sure for the article. But I know China's been withdrawing as far as buying oil from a certain particular country. So they're switching to find new buyers. And also this whole situation with the oil in Venezuela and something like that. How much of a wave do you think this will affect the economic market? Do you think it's going to cause other currencies to spiral?
So Iran actually swapped out the U.S. dollar for the euro about 6 months ago for trading oil. So the oil wouldn't be traded in U.S. dollars; it'd be traded in the euro. And China has been buying a lot of oil from Iran and using the petro yuan, so to speak, or the renminbi. I think that's what it's called. So
Renminbi one.
Right. So what's going on now is that China is basically backfilling for the sanctions against Iran by allowing the oil to be traded in their currency, and the European Union is basically on board with Iran trading oil in euros instead of dollars. So the last time a country tried this was in 2000 under Saddam Hussein in Iraq, and he switched from the U.S. dollar down to the over to the euro, and by 2003 they invaded.
So it pretty much is causing a rift then.
It can cause a ripple
Mm.
from a market standpoint. It can shoot oil from where it is right now, from $70 a barrel, probably up to $90 a barrel if something was to happen.
Do you now Iran's in it pretty much going from the defense into the offense, right? So let's say they were to hit one of the bases, hit one of the locations. What do you think? How do you think would play out? Things would play out from that point on.
Iran has 30,000 missiles in their arsenal, so they have way more than enough, if not more. That's just what's been projected. That there's at least 30,000 short range and medium range ballistic missiles, which is why when Iran tests long range ballistic missiles, that the United States gets really nervous and they start putting out their PR campaign that they're going to put more sanctions on Iran for testing their ballistic missiles, because that becomes a problem for the United States, because their longest ballistic missile can actually reach London. So that's the furthest that it can actually go. But what I'm saying here is that I don't think Iran is going to react militarily at this point, because they do have support from the European Union, and they do have support from Russia, and they do have support from China. So you have three major players at the table that are basically saying no to the United States in terms of that policy. The JCPOA was something that everybody had agreed upon, and now the United States Trump actually pulls back and says, no, well, I don't agree with that. Well, just because you don't agree with it doesn't mean that everybody else should have to disagree as well, because all the other companies that have made it into Iran have invested billions of dollars into it. Total, Luke Oil, Gazprom from Russia. There's multiple mega entities inside Iran that have already set up shop since the JCPOA has been established in 2015, and they're expecting to do business. But now Trump is saying anybody who does business with Iran at this point would have sanctions put on them. Well, if you're going to put sanctions on your friends, well, who needs enemies?
You got any questions? We got any points to make on this MOT?
It's just that's why capitalism shouldn't be running government. Period. In no way. Nobody with a capitalist agenda should be anywhere near the top of American foreign policy. Look at where we're at. Specifically because a person can donate $50 million to whatever campaign in 27 states out of the 50, and they can have their will be done. That overturns American democracy. All they have to do, screw 37, 35. That's 2/3. If you were the person to go in a country and be like, look, we're going to hand out free money to anybody who's going to do this, you can't fight that.
It's interesting.
Now,
you can't. It's bad. It's bad, and you can't fight it.
I brung up the map. Sure, I brung up the map. Now, Mike, you were saying that one of your last statements. I want to show it on the map so people can look at the map while we're speaking about it, about the missiles.
Yes, so they put short to medium range ballistic missiles inside Iraq, inside Baghdad.
Okay, now I'm zooming in for the people that's looking at. So it's good to show the map while we're explaining it. This is Iraq right here. Baghdad is the capital of Iraq. You see the surrounding countries of Syria, Turkey, Iran, and Kuwait, and Jordan. And you said the short range missiles, right?
Short to medium range ballistic missiles. So short to medium range means anywhere between 250 kilometers to 700 kilometers.
All right, and these missiles,
300 to 500 miles square radius.
Okay. And you said these missiles can reach where?
Unguided.
Well, we don't know if they're guided or unguided, because the new missiles that they've developed are pretty much exclusive to to Iran since they've modified them. There's old Soviet weapons, but they've actually been modified in recent years to actually hit guided targets. So we saw some of the ballistic missiles being used inside Yemen that were being pointed at Aramco facilities being fired from Sana'a. So
Okay.
some of that is just a glimpse of what they've been able to do by modifying these rockets or these missiles. To answer your question, Lionel, Riyadh, Tel Aviv,
Not.
eh, excuse me.
I say definitely all the cities that you name. Like whenever they make these plans, they always make a plan for overlapping circles around those cities that would gain or garner the proper amount of attention. So everything that you just said is true.
Yeah, absolutely. And the problem is that Israel can retaliate because they have THAAD. They have a terminally high altitude aerial defense system put in place, as well as the Patriot missile battery as well. The thing is that Saudi Arabia doesn't have they don't have the resources available. They bought a lot of weapons from the United States or over the last couple of years, but the problem is they haven't had full delivery of these resources. So any sort of disruption in Saudi affairs on the ground can send a ripple effect politically around the country, and you can have total collapse within a few days. People can't get access to food. Your logistics in the Persian Gulf become hampered. You have ongoing war with Yemen, where the Houthis are actually handing you your ass at this point from a military standpoint. A bunch of guys in sandals and towels wrapped around their heads, basically taking down your military. Um, we don't know how many F-16s have been lost over the last couple of years going into Yemen. So we know that Saudi Arabia is hurting right now, and they can't afford to fight another war on the second front, whether it's against Iran or it's against Qatar or it's against Syria altogether. They just can't afford it unless Israel gets involved and tries to help them. And we know that recent revelations of coming about for Israel has they have military bases inside Saudi Arabia. They also have a airstrip. So we know that if they want to hit Iran as a retaliating point, that they would use actually Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia would be the prime target in case there's a military conflict.
Mhm. Now, to show people where Riyadh is the capital of Saudi Arabia. And you mentioned Tel Aviv. I think you mentioned Tel Aviv, which is
Tel Aviv
supposed.
being Tel Aviv being the actual capital and not Jerusalem.
Yeah, I
I'm
looked at, Tel Aviv is the capital of Israel, but per this map, they have Jerusalem, the capital of Israel, because of what happened a couple months ago. All right.
Well, that's them forcing Google's hand. Typically, that shouldn't happen, but that's them forcing Google's hand.
hmm hmm Okay. Let's go ahead and get to our next article here. It comes from RealClearDefense.com. Deterrence debate ignores the hard questions about nuclear war. Written by Hugh White, September 5th. Andrew Davies and Rod Lyon have had an interesting debate here recently about nuclear weapons. Andrew has argued that we need to take the risk of nuclear war more seriously and that we should therefore work much harder to eliminate nuclear weapons. Rod sees the risk of nuclear war was very low and argues that eliminating nuclear weapons would make the world more dangerous by making major conventional war more likely. I like to triangulate their debate by supporting Andrew's pessimism over Rod's optimism about the risk of nuclear war by offering a rather different view from Andrew's of what we should do about it. All right. I think I know where this article is going. Would you all still like me to read this one? Because the thesis is really much in the first couple sentences there. In the yays or nays?
Yes, you guys just go ahead and get into it.
All right. Rod argues that nuclear war is unlikely, and that nuclear weapons prevent major conventional wars by extrapolating from the experience of the 73 years since nuclear weapons arrived. There is something in the what he says. It's plainly true that since 1945, nuclear weapons have not been used, and that there have been and that there have been no full-scale major power wars. And it's very probable that the existence of nuclear forces has helped prevent major wars from breaking out. The question is, how far can we credibly extrapolate from that? My problem with Rod's analysis is that when he concludes on this basis that nuclear weapons prevent war, his sample size is too small. The most you can say is that there have been prevented wars so far, but almost all our data comes from one particular historical episode, the Cold War, the only full-scale hegemonic rivalry we've seen since 1945. And as Rod himself says in his response to Andrew, every strategic contest is different and unique. The Cold War certainly was. Its progress and outcome reflected the very specific strategic, ideologic, geographic, economic, military, and internal political characteristics of the rivals and their rivalry, and the skills and experience of those who made the big decisions on both sides. In those specific circumstances, nuclear war appears to have prevented major war. In particular, it seems to me that that was because the circumstances of the Cold War created a situation in which each side was convinced that the other was resolved and to fight a nuclear war, despite the catastrophic consequences, in order to prevent any significant shift in the other's favor. Deterrence worked in the Cold War because both sides believed, or to be more precise, believed enough that the other wasn't bluffing. I share Rod's optimism that nuclear weapons will keep on keeping the peace for as long as that is true. But how sure can we be that this will be so in future large-scale strategic contests between nuclear powers? And even more urgently, how sure can we be that this is true in the contests we see today? The risk of nuclear war between, say, the US and China is not that either side will decide that it's worth fighting one to achieve its strategic goals. The risk is that they will convince themselves that the other side is not willing to fight one to stop them, and they will turn out to be wrong. How likely is it? How likely is it, for example, that China would come to believe that America would not fight a nuclear war to defend Taiwan? How likely is it that Washington today can display the statecraft required to convince Beijing that it would, or even understand what is required to convince China of its resolve? I think these likelihoods are very low, in part because of the almost universal assumption in Washington that China could not possibly doubt America's resolve in Asia. This is dangerously complacent when the U.S. has done so little to demonstrate their resolve and provided so many good reasons for Beijing to doubt it. That makes the risk of nuclear war between America and China really quite high. So that should so what should we do about it? Andrew thinks we should redouble our efforts to eliminate nuclear weapons. I certainly agree that we would be a great that it would excuse me. I certainly agree that that would be a great thing to do, but it seems a very inadequate response to the risks we face today. After all, there's no reason for confidence that nuclear weapons will be eliminated anytime soon. And FYI, anybody can stop me if the gist of this argument, this gist of this topic is understood. That being said, we should focus on the more modest but more achievable task of trying to reduce the risk of nuclear weapons are used. And how could we do that? There seem to be only two sure ways. The first would be to establish the clarity of resolve that underpin successful nuclear deterrence in the Cold War. That's harder for America than for China, but it wouldn't be impossible. It must, however, be real because bluffing is almost bound to fail. That means Americans must first debate and decide whether they really are willing to fight a nuclear war and risk losing cities to save Taiwan. The answer is probably is no. The second will be to step back from the strategic contest that is now escalating between Washington and Beijing. Those who share Rod's confidence that nuclear weapons prevent major war and will therefore never be used in combat aren't much worried about increasing competition between nuclear powers because they are sure it won't lead to war, or that if war comes, it won't become nuclear. There are therefore less unnecessary there are therefore less uneasy about escalating strategic rivalry and more inclined to oppose policies that aim to prevent or limit it. Those who, like me, see a real risk that rivalry between great powers lead to war, and that war between nuclear armed powers can easily go nuclear, tend to place a higher priority on limiting rivalries, even at the price of making concessions that we would otherwise be very reluctant to make. Because, after all, we have to ask what is so important that we would be willing to fight a nuclear war to avoid it. That's a hard question, and it's understandable that so many people prefer to ignore it in favor of debating the much easier one about whether nuclear weapons should be abolished. All right. The turns debate ignores hard questions about nuclear war. MOT, you have any comments on this one? All right. So, Mike, got any comments on this? Go ahead and mute him.
Yeah. They're just basically speculating on what's the value of Taiwan, right? What's the value of going to war? Who's more valuable right here? Is it really worth going to war over Israel? Is it really worth going to war over Taiwan? Is it really worth going to war, come to blows over Syria? Like, what's the immediate value behind that? How is that a return on your investment? There is no even Turkey, right? We know that the U.S. military and the U.S. government took out their nuclear weapons out of Turkey the last few weeks. They took out their missile batteries out of Turkey as well when it came to shooting down the Russian Sukhoi fighter jet back in 2015, October 2015, or November 2015. Sorry. So they weren't willing to go to war for Turkey. However, the next year later, they were willing to overthrow the Turkish government for complying with complying with Moscow, or more specifically Putin, because what would be the retaliation of shooting down a Russian fighter jet over Syria by Turkey, a NATO member? We know that the United States was going to have their back, and Turkey figured this out and said, "Screw this! No sense in us getting into a nuclear conflict," because at the time Turkey had nuclear weapons, America's nuclear weapons inside Ankara. So if Russia wanted to retaliate, Russia doesn't have a whole lot of resources they can play with, but they do have nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are usually used as a deterrent. However, you don't want to use nuclear weapons unless you have to. And if you back Russia into a corner, a superpower, you're not going to give them any other choice other than to launch them. Same thing with China. If you close off the South China Sea because you want to prevent them from actually doing business, and you want to send a message to them, then what's the consequences of that? China is a nuclear power too, and so is North Korea. Do you really want to keep playing games, with humanity? Because there's enough nuclear weapons inside Pakistan, India, North Korea, Iran to basically eliminate human life as we know it. Because the amount of weapons that will go off at once would basically contaminate the clouds in the atmosphere, and we wouldn't be able to breathe, and there wouldn't be any food to grow, any crops to grow. The agriculture would die within 6 months. Starvation would ensue, and human life would end.
Right. So even if what you and what one of the guys were saying on the article is saying if nuclear war were to ensue, the person that wants to win the war has more to lose from engaging in nuclear war than not engaging in nuclear war.
So in
That's the
other words,
negative side.
you're saying that when it comes to warfare, you got to kind of think like, okay, what do we have to gain even just to get to the war? What do we have to gain, what we have to lose? But I think when it comes to weapons of mass destruction, um, I think it's used more of kind of to keep everybody in check. Uh, I don't really ever see it really being used unless you know this if it's not thought through because everybody thinks about it. I think on both sides, but I think right now we're coming nuclear weapons, man. It's kind of like it's kind of overkill, you know. And what do you guys think that even they were to uh, denuclearize some of their weapons, would that even make a difference? Is it even like isn't like two too many? You know, sir, one too many anyway. You know, so what's your thoughts on that?
Well, they tried to reduce the amount of nuclear weapons per state. I believe Russia had something like 7,000, and I think they wanted to reduce it down to 1,500, and I think the same thing for the United States wanted to reduce it down to 1,500. Um, Even if you do reduce it down to 1,500, whether you have 1,500 or 10, that's one too many weapons that can actually take out humanity, and that's not something that anybody wants to play with.
That's what I was thinking.
What they have been doing is making their weapons more tactical. So the ability to have backpack nuclear weapons, basically put them in a duffel bag and bring them on the battlefield to try to end the war quicker. Take out a whole entire brigade or a moving infantry. Makes it It's supposed to make it much easier to checkmate your opponent. Um, but what's the chances that that goes right? It's 50-50 chance that can go right, right? So what happens if that falls into the wrong hands? You have nuclear weapons falling into the wrong hands, and it falls into some white nationalist group inside Europe who claims to be far right, and they decide that they're going to go into they're going to go into Africa and decide they're going to take over. There's all types of things that can go wrong when you're talking about putting these backpack nukes, these tactical battlefield nukes. It's just not, to me, it's not realistic to have these weapons at all. I can understand if you want to use these weapons to take down an incoming asteroid or something, but why do you need something so lethal that it basically eliminates humanity?
That's a good point.
Yeah, I agree with you.
All right. Any other points on this one? All right, let's go ahead to our next topic on the docket. Our next topic on the docket comes from the Times of India. 2+2 talks. India to tell U.S. its decision to go ahead with S-400 deal with Russia, written September 2nd. India is expected to convey to the U.S. during the upcoming 2+2 talks that is going to ahead with the RS-4000 core deal with Russia to procure a batch of S-400 Trump air defense missile systems, notwithstanding the American sanctions on military transactions with Moscow, official sources said on Sunday. They said India is likely to seek a waiver from the Trump administration for the mega deal, citing its requirement for the missile system in the wake of evolving regional security architecture, as well as considering its close defense ties with Russia. India has almost concluded the S-400 missile deal with Russia, and we are going ahead with it. Our position on the issue will be conveyed to the U.S., said a high level official source. The U.S. has imposed military sanctions against Russia under the stringent CAATSA, or Counter America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act. law for its annexation of Crimea, as well as alleged meddling in the American presidential election in 2016. CATSA mandates the Donald Trump administration to punish entities and countries engaging in significant transaction with the defense or intelligence establishment of Russia. Randall Schreiber, the Pentagon's senior official handling issues relating to Asia, said Thursday that the U.S. cannot guarantee that India will be exempted from sanctions if it purchases weapons and defense systems from Russia. The U.S. has been indicating that it does not want India to finalize the deal with Russia. A new U.S. defense legislation authorizes President Donald Trump to exempt countries from the military sanctions. The first edition of the much awaited 2 plus 2 dialogue on strategic affairs between the U.S. and India will take place here on September 6th, during which a range of bilateral, regional, and global issues of mutual interest will be decided. Under the new framework finalized last year, External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj and Defense Minister Nirmala Sitharaman will hold talks with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Secretary of Defense James Mattis from the U.S. The sources said India will push for a waiver from the U.S. for the missile deal with Russia, as the air defense system was critical for its security preparedness. They said there was a possibility that both Russia and India are likely to announce the deal before the annual summit between Prime Minister Modi and Russian President Vladimir Putin in October. There has been mounting concerns in India over the U.S. sanctions against Russian defense majors, including Rosoboron export, as billions of dollars of military purchases may be impacted because of the punitive measures. India wants to procure the long-range missile systems to tighten its air defense mechanism, particularly along the nearly 4,000-kilometer long Sino-Indian border. S-400 is known as Russia's most advanced long-range surface-to-air missile defense system. China was the first foreign buyer to seal a government-to-government deal with Russia in 2014 to procure the lethal missile system, and Moscow has already started delivery of unknown number of the S-400 missile systems to Beijing. The S-400 is an upgrade version of the S-300 systems. The missile system, manufactured by Almaz Antony, has been in service in Russia since 2007. All right, another country is buying the S-400 missile systems from Russia. And another country, America, is going to sanction and punish because of that. In the past, we talked about other countries such as Qatar. Um, I believe New Delhi said it also, but I know New Delhi is the capital of India. Turkey and other countries has been purchasing the S-400 system, and America has not been liking that because of the sanctions, the CATSA sanctions on Russia. What does this
Egypt as
say?
well.
Egypt too, Egypt too. Now, what does this say about India? And I understand the 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 border they have with China, and but what does this say? This whole deal.
Well, India and Russia has had a long relationship since the 70s, so it's not uncommon that they would buy Russian goods um, in terms of military equipment because they have a military relationship. They've made many different weapon systems together. Um, if you look up the Pantasir S1 or S2, that was co-developed with the Indians because India actually created the chassis for the vehicle, if I remember correctly. I believe that's a Tata chassis. So they've been working with Russia for a long time, and they're not going to break rank with Russia just to appease the West. They want access to the wealth that the West has, but they don't want to sacrifice their long-term relationships with other superpowers such as Russia and Japan as well, because Japan is also a close ally of India. So um, these relationships can't be broken up just because somebody in Washington D.C. has their boxes on backwards. It just doesn't make any sense.
You got any questions or comments on this, Jack?
Yeah. Now let's say they were to buy the weapons, everything pushes through, and the U.S. throws sanctions on them, right?
Can you speak up a little bit?
Let's say they were to buy the sorry. Let's say they were to buy the weapons, right? And U.S. throws sanctions on them, right? So I'm thinking, what would be the ramifications of these sanctions with the India and U.S. and how would that affect uh, the economic board part of the globe? Like, how would that affect that?
Well, they wouldn't actually. I don't think they would actually sanction uh, Indian companies, but they will start sanctioning individuals inside the Indian government. Probably, um, when you put sanctions on any country, that's a form of soft warfare. Basically, you're basically this is the first position for warfare. You're basically moving your pawn forward. Now, you can always move your pawn backwards. At least in politically speaking, you can always move your pawn backwards if you remove the sanctions. But the problem is, if you sanction India and you already made agreements with India to have shared technologies previously under the Obama administration, the Indian government and the U.S. government decided that they were going to have a mutual relationship, that they were going to give India access to high technology in exchange for logistics ports inside India, so that they were going to have a naval port and a logistics hub inside India, basically creating a new military base with India. If you're telling them now that you're going to put sanctions on them because they're doing deals with Russia, then what's the point in us having, allowing you to have access to our naval ports, our warm water ports? What's the point? Doesn't make any sense. So I don't know if the United States is just going to bluff on this one, or if they decide to go forward, that everything else that they've previously made agreements on is just going to be out the window and it's not going to be worth anything.
So you think they're going to go ahead and go with the waivers? And if they do, how would that reflect um, USA's perception throughout the whole world? And right now, from what I'm seeing, the United States is losing their authority as far as they're pretty much just sanctioning everybody, right, for every little thing. And it seems like countries of the East are just coming together. So it's kind of creating more discord with their relationships they have with other nations. Do you think this is be able? See how things are right now. Do you think we'll be able to recover from this, or is more now it's too far gone? What's your thoughts?
Well, it doesn't really affect the United States per se. I mean, that's just their way of doing diplomacy. Is that we're gonna punish everybody who we don't agree with, and it's the United States is in decline as it stands. So to India, it doesn't even matter because India is going to be a superpower by 2030. That's already guaranteed. They have the strongest. They're the strongest IT powerhouse in the world. They have so many. They have billions of people and millions of people who can write code. That's their bread and butter is information technology, which is why a lot of companies outsource their support and as well as their services to India, because India provides some of the best talent coming in terms of IT. So they can survive if they need to. They're moving into the fourth industrial revolution right now as we speak. So India doesn't really need the United States per se, and Trump doesn't seem to like H-1B visas. So cutting off India would be um, Trump's way of doing diplomacy in order to persuade them not to have the S-400 system. But a few hundred H-1B visas coming out of India into the United States, that's worth the sacrifice for India if they need to have the S-400 missile system in place.
Understood. So pretty much Trump ways or United States government ways of diplomacy, in other words, is very ineffective. I think why? Just to me, it seems like they're burning bridges, and then they throw a lot of bluffs out there. They don't follow through, and it creates an air of, I think, weakness on their part. So um, it's going to be very interesting to see how that goes. Because I remember there was another video I saw, where I think it was the Philippines. The United States was trying to sell them jets, and they were just like, "Why do we need these for?" You know. So I think. What was
Yeah.
your thoughts on that?
Well, in this regard, the United States is basically trying to push the Philippines away from China, away from Russia, because Duterte went to Russia and Putin said, "I'll give you anything that you want, including nuclear weapons." So that means that the he has a blank checkbook that he can write. And what the United States tried to do was offer him some fighter jets against radical extremists in his country. That doesn't really work. You can't bomb a neighborhood because you don't like the people that's there. That's a a rational way of actually policing. And probably that's probably how they feel about the United States, right? If they could, they would actually bomb Chicago if they could. That's their way of thinking.
I have to agree with everything you're saying, man. I kind of been thinking this already, but it's strange to see it like unfold um, on a larger scale. So it's interesting to see how things play out as far as that. I think they're gonna not place sanctions on them, but I want to see how India move forward from that point on with their relationship with the United States, and see how that goes on from there.
All right. Any other comments? Okay.
Let's get a comment from MOT.
I think
Yeah, too much.
he gone for the night. He drank that
Mm.
wine. All right. Let's go to Reuters.com. U.S.'s Mattis says zero tolerance that rebels in Syria, Idlib, have chemical weapons capability. All right. There was zero tolerance of chemical weapons capabilities posed by groups opposing Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in the province of Idlib. U.S. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis said, adding that the facts did not back Russian assertions. Syrian government forces planned a phased offensive in Idlib and surrounded areas held by rebels opposed to Assad, who has been backed by both Russian and Iranian forces in the country's civil war. Russian and Syrian jets hammered the rebel stronghold on Tuesday, days before the leaders of Russia, Iran, and Turkey met to discuss the expected Syrian government offensive that could spark a humanitarian disaster. In the past few days, Russian officials, cited by Russian media, have said there was a plan by militants to stage a false chemical weapons attack in Idlib province to frame Assad. We have zero tolerance that shows the opposition has any chemical capability, Mattis told reporters traveling with him to the Indian capital of New Delhi for a high-level dialogue on Thursday between the South Asian nation and the United States. Russian ambassador to the United States, Anatoly Antonov, said he had told U.S. officials that Moscow was concerned over signs the United States was preparing new strikes on Syria and warned against groundless and illegal aggression against Syria. We have made very clear that by putting out in the window that somehow any chemical weapon use coming up in the future could be ascribed to the opposition. Well, we want to see that data, Mattis said. We cannot see anything that indicates the opposition has that capability. He said instead there was a history of Assad's government using such weapons. U.S. President Donald Trump has twice ordered U.S. led strikes against targets in Syria, in response to what Washington called the Assad government's use of chemical weapons against civilians. On Tuesday, the White House said that if Assad used chemical weapons, the United States and its allies would respond swiftly and appropriately. Asked if he saw indications of the Syrian government preparing to use chemical weapons in Idlib, Mathis said, I think the best answer to that is we are very alert. Sputnik, a Russian state owned news outlet, said recently the White House Rescue Service had delivered a large shipment of toxic substances to local armed militant groups. The Pentagon said the Russian government was using a concentrated disinformation campaign to discredit the United States and its allies. That Russia is seeking to plant false lies about chemical weapons use suggestions. Excuse me, read that again. That Russia is seeking to plant false lies about chemical weapons use suggests that Moscow is seeking to deflect from its own culpability when these heinous weapons are used. Commander Sean Robertson, a Pentagon spokesman, said in a statement. All right. Zero tolerance that rebels in the Syria's Idlib have chemical weapons capability. Now, last week, Saturday, I apologize, Saturday, we read an article that laid out how this false story was going to be played out and how the reporters, local reporters and American reporters was going to report it and basically egg on how serious this was to induce a targeted attack in Syria. Now, does this have? I'm sure this have something to do with that, but on what level does this have something to do with that?
Well, they're basically just going to play. They're going to punt the football on this one. Basically, say that the rebels don't have the capabilities of moving around chemical weapons, and that the Assad government does. But this is the last stronghold for militants in these areas. And this is the final push. This will close the deal, and it only takes about maybe 30 days for them to clear it all out. The United States wants to make this very hard for the Syrian government and the Russians to finish this operation because if you put your concentrated resources inside that one pocket of the country, then what the United States will basically say is that there was some chemical weapon moved around. We don't really have any evidence, but we're going to bomb it anyways, right? And who are you going to bomb? You're going to bomb Syrian soldiers. You're going to bomb Russian soldiers as well. And with that being said, if you decide to bomb Russian soldiers as well as Syrian soldiers in that pocket, what are the consequences of that? If you think that these guys are going to take it lying down, that's not going to happen. And now we know that we spoke about this earlier, but Iranian Revolutionary Guard have put ballistic missiles inside Baghdad. Those same missiles can actually hit the sources of American aggression as well as British aggression. So if the British and the British and the Americans want to play that game, then go for it. But the consequences could be lethal.
Any comments on this, Jack? All right. We're gonna go into our next article. It's a pretty short article. Our next article comes from Haaretz.com. Iran, Russia prepare to battle each other over control of post-war Syria. U.S. sanctions are pushing Iran to try and carve out even more profits from Syria's post-war reconstruction. I want to say there's more to this article, but I'm trying to see if I'm missing something and nothing is coming up. Was there more to this article or was that just it?
It should say read more or something like that.
sorry, I'm bad. For the last article, I'm sorry, I didn't get a chance. My phone's acting up. For the last article, right?
Uh,
You guys,
uh,
you guys, you guys can hear me?
yeah.
All right. For the last
We're
article.
actually reading the current article right now. Let us
Oh,
get to
okay.
this article and we can get back.
All right. Okay.
Let me refresh one time, see if I
Bring that
see.
back. Oh, you know what? They put it behind a paywall.
Mm, okay. Did you read this
That's why
early?
I did. Yeah, I read it earlier.
Let's see if I can search the title and see if something come up. Still, I want to make
If you
sure.
go to
There you go.
there it is right there.
Cool. All right. Our title again. Iran, Russia prepare to battle each other over control of post-war Syria. U.S. sanctions are pushing Iran to try and carve out even more profits from Syria's post-war reconstruction. The events of the past days in Syria have one thing in common. As the war in Syria is entering its final stages, a new battle is emerging. Both Russia and Iran, who supported the Assad regime throughout the civil war, is expecting to reap the benefits of Assad's victory. While the two countries have long been allies in the Syrian arena, their interests sometimes diverge, especially as both are eyeing the financial rewards of Syria's upcoming reconstruction process. The tensions in Syria escalated on Tuesday when Russia moved naval forces toward the Syrian coast, and NATO criticized Moscow for its aggressive moves. Russian media called the deployment Moscow's largest naval buildup since it entered the Syrian conflict in 2015. The reinforcement comes as Russia's ally, Syrian President Bashar Assad, is believed to be considering an assault on the last big rebel held enclave, Idlib, in the north. The Syrian naval force was sent to the region at the same time that the Syrian regime announced the signing of a new security agreement with Iran, following a visit by Iran's defense minister to Damascus earlier this week. As part of the agreement, Iran will help rebuild Syria's military and defense industries. Israel believes the Iranians are sending a message: we are here to stay. The rehabilitation of the Syrian army, which is in very poor condition after the war, is not high on the list of threats that concern Israel. Russia and Iran have both supported Assad over the past 7 years. During this time, they did not directly clash with each other in Syria, but Israeli officials believe the two countries are at odds on some issues related to Syria's future. The contracts for Syria reconstruction, for which both countries are vying, will likely include some of Syria's oil reserves, and at least those that have survived the war. A behind the scenes battle over who will control the Assad regime in the new Syria is now already underway. One country that is likely going to stay out of the infighting over the reconstruction process is the United States. The Trump administration has no clear policy on the day after in Syria, except for one principle: no American money will be spent on it. The American ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, made the point clear at a speech she gave on Tuesday in Washington, explaining that Russia and the Assad regime own Syria now. You broke it, you own it, Haley said at a summit organized by the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Haley added that perhaps Russia and Assad expect the United States to lead the reconstruction process of Syria, but we are going to stay out of it. Russia and the regime, she said, now own a great pile of rubble in Syria. The concern is that without any American involvement, the great pile of rubble could turn into a future source of income for Iran, exactly at the same time that its economy is being put under pressure because of U.S. sanctions. In Damascus, the Iranian defense minister, spoke out spoke about Iran's commitment to Syria's reconstruction, hinting at such a calculation. One of Tehran's goals is to take over Syria's telecom industry, which was damaged during the war, but not completely destroyed. Matthew Brodsky, a Middle East analyst in Washington, recently published a review of the Assad regime's financial situation, in which he mentioned telecom agreements between Iran and Syria that have already been signed, explaining that the telecommunications sector is clearly important to Iran, not only for the financial return, but for eavesdropping on the population. Hezbollah's telecommunications contracts in Lebanon have paid enormous dividends in this regard. Brodsky, who is a senior fellow at the Security Studies Group think tank, also mentioned a deal between Iran and Syria that will allow Iran to develop phosphate mines in Syria, although it is not clear if Iran will have exclusive rights to those mines or have to share them with Russia. In addition, he wrote about leases between Iran and the Syrian regime involving some 12,000 acres of land in Homs and Tartus provinces, which could be used for building oil and gas terminals. Another financial benefit for Iran that could emerge from the reconstruction process is the transfer of agricultural lands in Syria, which were left behind by Syrian citizens turned refugees over the last 7 years into Iranian hands. Brodsky wrote about the Assad regime's repopulation schemes that would turn some of those lands over to members of the pro Iranian Shiite militias as a means of helping them entrench their presence in Syria. Some in Israel believe these lands will also, at some point, host new construction projects which will be built by Iranian companies. 2 weeks ago, Iran Tabatabai, an expert on Iran and a political scientist at the RAND Corporation, told Haaretz that Israel's goal of getting Iran out of Syria is unrealistic. In light of the Islamic Republic's expectation to make profits from the reconstruction process, it's hard to see them going anywhere, she said. The Russians don't have the will to take Iran completely out of Syria. The Iranians have a significant presence in Syria, and Russia has no incentive to try to force them out, something they may not even be able to achieve. The American sanctions only increase Iran's interest in carving out whatever profits it can from Syria's reconstruction, she added. In order to see the benefits it hopes to get, however, Iran will also need to other countries, mostly China, Europe, and the Gulf countries, to invest in Syria's reconstruction. Over the last few days, there have been calls from human rights groups and former European officials not to invest in Syria's reconstruction as long as Assad continues to commit massive human rights violations. Carl Bildt, a former foreign minister, tweeted this week that we should not listen to Russia's pleas for money to rebuild what they bombed in Syria. All signs point to Assad blocking returns of Syrian refugees and wanting to profit from reconstruction. Ken Roth, executive director of Human Rights Watch, expressed a similar view, writing in the British newspaper The Independent. Long before any talk of providing reconstruction assistance for Syria, which in any event would require lifting separate targeted sanctions, European government should call out Russia's complicity in Syria's war crimes and vigorously press the Kremlin to end these atrocities and stop underwriting Syria's repression. It was the deployment of the Russian Air Force 3 years ago that tilted the scales of the war in favor of Assad, who at the time controlled only a quarter of the country's territory. Even today, Russia maintains its military presence in Syria to ensure the regime's upper hand, but it has other strategic interests, primarily maintaining access to the Mediterranean through the port under its control in Tartus in northern Syria. Last month, the Assad regime completed its takeover of the Syrian Golan Heights, and after Russia agreed with Iran that Iranian forces would be kept at a distance of 85 kilometers from Israel's border with no notable expectation, Iranians are still present in and around Damascus. In Israel, meanwhile, tensions has been noted even tensions have been noted even within the close alliance of Iran and the Assad regime. In recent weeks, there were two incidents in the eastern parts of Syria, close to the border with Iraq, in which the Syrian military attacked Shiite militias associated with Iran. These attacks appear to be part of a local internal fight over dominance in that specific regime, which is critical for Iran's plans of creating a land bridge to the Mediterranean through Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. The same area was the site of an airstrike 2 months ago, which some media outlets reported was conducted by Israel. The bottom line is that the war in Syria has already been won by Assad, but now the fight over the day after is beginning, and it will include power struggles between all the different parties active in the Syrian arena. All right. Iran, Russia prepare to battle each other over control of post-war Syria. So, in reading this, I can imagine the profits that can be gained by rebuilding a country, uh, a country's infrastructure and its capital city's infrastructure after it has been decimated by war. And this leads me to even think of other things that could be bombed just because during a war, knowing that okay, after this war is over, that we're gonna try to rebuild this type of infrastructure that we're bombing just because things happen in war, friendly fire happen. Um, this is a this is a lucrative business deal between the two governments of Iran and Syria, which the article said that can pay Syria well into the future and will give them some type of income that will circumvent American sanctions on them. Any other comments on this?
Yeah, you're right. Basically, Syria has become a penny stock at this point.
Hmm.
So you buy it cheap right now, and you use the reconstruction process to build up the value of it, and watch it watch the dividends start to pay over the next maybe 10 to 20 years, because it's going to take at least 20 years to rebuild Syria as it stands right now, depending on what they're trying to do. Um, for what it stands for right now, and I mentioned this in the past, that this would be a perfect opportunity for black men to actually make investments into Syria as well, because I watched an interview with Bashar al-Assad. I think it was with um what's this guy who got replaced from CNBC, well, from ABC, the one who got fired for being a pervert.
Mm,
I forget his name right now, but
Matt
that was
Lauer.
his last interview with yeah, Matt Lauer. Basically, he had an interview with him, and Assad said anybody who wants to come and help Syria rebuild, you're more than welcome to show up and come. So, and I think there's a lot of, for a country like Syria that's rebuilding from the ground up, um, there's a lot of opportunities there for all types of projects in terms of blockchain and cryptocurrencies and things like that that can actually be lucrative for investment. But I don't see uh, Russia and Iran coming to blows over that. I do see that there is a political spat between the two, because um, Iran has invested a lot of blood and money into Syria, and they want a return on their investment. Russia has invested a lot of resources into Syria as well, and they have a 99-year lease on their military port inside Tartus, as well as the Khamenei Air Base. So they're not leaving anytime soon, and so there's going to have to be some kind of splitting of the pie, basically slicing of the pie of what's left of Syria. I don't foresee them going to any sort of military conflict. Chinese have already Xi Jinping has already said that he's willing to invest into Syria as well. So I can see him sending a whole lot of excess Chinese labor up there to start building bridges and dams and roads and things of that nature. Your basic rudimentary infrastructure that needs to be built in order to make the society function.
Mm, okay, okay. Any comments on this, Jack?
Yeah, I agree with what Mike is saying. I read, saw another, there's a video article about Iraq, how we left the war there, and now their water system is pretty much ruined. So they have no fresh water. People are getting sick left, right. Kids, children, kids, adults, senior citizens, flooding hospitals. And so this left that country in ruins. So again, I saw another opportunity there as far as fixing their water problem. So again, when it comes to opportunities, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities there. I'm not too sure about everything what Michael was saying earlier about as far as what Russia's trying to develop up there. I know as far as their lease and the resources, but I know as far as opportunities, there's going to be a lot of opportunities there. So that's something, that should be something people should look into. That's just all I have to say.
All right, all right. Any other comments on that one? All right. Let's get to our next article here. Our next article comes from BusinessInsider.com. The U.S. Navy just sent Russia and China powerful messages with aircraft carrier shows of force. Written by Alec Locke 20 hours ago. The U.S. Navy carried out two high-profile aircraft carrier training events in key waters that sent messages to China and Russia. The U.S.'s two main competitors and the two countries close to matching the U.S.'s military might. The U.S. Navy's Ronald Reagan Carrier Strike Group joined Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Force escort flotilla for a battle group to conduct joint military exercises in the highly contested South China Sea on Friday. Ooh, the Navy said. Japan sent the Kaga, a small aircraft carrier technically classified as a destroyer, along with guided missile destroyers, to train with the U.S.'s only forward deployed aircraft carrier, the Reagan. The training advanced the U.S. and Japan's vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific, a key part of U.S. strategy to prevent Beijing from tightening its grip on the region by further militarizing the South China Sea. But beyond just teaching U.S. and Japan carriers how to fight together, Washington sent Beijing a message that it won't be pushed out of the South China Sea and that if a fight comes, it won't stand alone. China, which illegally annexed about 90% of the South China Sea and has sought to unilaterally dictate who can use the resource rich waterway, which sees trillions of dollars in annual trade, has struggled to make allies in the region. The U.S. has moved to counter China's attempt to hegemony by deepening ties with Australia, Japan, and India. On top of that, the U.S. just showed for the first time ever that it can update its supercarriers with a stealth aircraft perfect for taking out island fortresses like Beijing's South China Sea Holdings, the F-35C. Half a word away, the USS Abraham Lincoln and USS Harry S. Truman carriers did joint training, including the F-35C for the first time, but the exercise most likely had an additional audience in mind: Russia. The U.S. recently decided to bring back the Second Fleet, a Navy command that countered the threat from the Soviet Union and was stood down in 2011 when it seemed as if the Russian threat had waned. As Russia's navy increasingly increasingly menace as Russia's navy increasingly menaces the U.S. and looks to assert itself as a powerful navy in the Mediterranean and elsewhere, the U.S. has again found the need to defend its home waters of the near Atlantic. Russia, which has only one inactive shoddy aircraft carrier, cannot hope to compete with the U.S.'s multiple carriers and advanced aircraft. The U.S. has recently shuffled its schedule of aircraft carrier deployments to have more ships present to keep the pressure on Russia and China. The U.S. National Defense and Strategy documents from President Donald Trump administration outline a decided shift in U.S. focus from a post-Cold War mentality when the U.S.'s enemies were small, lightly armed cells of terrorists hidden in hills to a full-on competition among world powers as it was in the world wars. Russia and China have taken notice, with Russian ships exercising in the Mediterranean waters that wouldn't have normally reached before Russia's incursion into Syria in 2015, and Chinese ships challenging the right of U.S. ships and planes to pass through international spaces. Also, in 2015, the U.S. suspended freedom of navigation patrols, its main way of checking Chinese ambition in the South China Sea. But now the Navy is taking those challenges seriously. We are the best Navy in the world, and given the complex and competitive environment we are in, we can't take anything for granted or settle for the status quo, Rear Admiral John Wade, the commander of the Abraham Lincoln Strike Group, said in a Navy press release. With a renewed mission and the world's first carrier launched stealth aircraft, the U.S. has sent a clear signal to its main military rivals that U.S. Navy power is back and on the move. All right, there's a sentence in this article, which I'm going to go back to, which said um, the U.S. is strengthening its ties with Japan, Russia, and India. And I'm guessing India went, I'm going to guess, go out on a limb and guess that India went along with this S-400 purchases from Russia because they know that U.S. is trying to strengthen its ties with them because of the situation that's going on in the South China Sea with China. And they mentioned in the article, in the previous articles we read today, that India is looking for a okay with from uh, America for them to purchase the X400 system and not put sanctions on them. I'm guessing that's why they did it because of the situation that's going on in the South China Sea and America trying to strengthen its ties with them because of that. Any comments?
Well, the United States doesn't have any logistics. Well, I shouldn't say they don't have any logistics, but if push comes to shove, China has a lot of allies that they've done trade deals with, and I suspect that those deals that they've worked out also include military agreements that they have to come to the defense of maybe China for that matter. So they could be ganging up on the U.S. In terms of that strategy. However, the United States knows that there's something, there's something going to come down the pipe that if push comes to shove, that if China decides to expand themselves like they're doing right now, even more so inside Africa, especially inside of West Africa, then that makes it possible for China to actually check the United States in terms of how they interact with each other, uh, especially in the Atlantic, right? You have all your West African states and facing the Atlantic, and if China decides to dock their ships there, they can easily get close to the United States and push them all the way back to right back into the into the naval ports of Maine and all the way down to South Carolina. So the United States doesn't want to get into a conflict in their backyard, so to speak. So um, they're going to try to ramp up and try to check China in their own yard and think that that's going to go down very well, but it's not. China launched 34 ships in the last 18 months, frigates and corvettes and patrol and what they call OPVs, offshore patrol vessels that all have missile capabilities, basically missile cruiser boats.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. Any comments on
Do
this,
you,
Jack?
yeah, do you think that's the overall goal that China is trying to do, trying to push back America? Because they're pushing out a lot of um, naval ships, really fast. So it's like, are they trying to? Is this more like a subtle warfare trying to push, or subtle strategy trying to push America back into their own backyards and out of theirs?
Yes, if they can't, if they're planning to expand, right, as a
Yeah.
nation on a global scale, you're going to need some form of blue water protection. Um, and China is expanding rapidly. You have all these, operations being set up, such as the BRI, which is the Belt and Road Initiative. Um, we saw Xi Jinping just this week alone sign 53 deals inside Africa for the BRI, which is the Belt and Road Initiative. Then he has to protect those resources for the foreseeable future, and the way you protect that is with a blue water navy.
Yes. Yes.
That's deep. Yeah, yeah. It feels like, and man,
Who? Yeah.
what can U.S. do right now? What can they do? What can they think of to do? Is it best to probably just try to strengthen ties? And because it's like I'm trying to think, hey, what's the next best move for U.S. and I literally can't come up with anything. So what do you think? What do you think of is best for them to do right now?
They had their time, and you brought this tangerine tyrant inside the White House, and he goes off the handle and he says, "Well, those are shithole countries." He's referring to Africa and Haiti. Well, those are the people that you're going to need to help
Mm,
defend your democracy, so to speak. So now you've made you basically burned your bridges, politically speaking, with those countries. They have very little interest in talking to you now because China's offering them not just money, but they're offering them infrastructure. We saw recently this week gaggles of Africans being sent to China for going to Chinese universities.
mm-hmm.
Um, all types of cultural exchanges, interracial marriages now.
Yep, I
Uh,
saw that too.
the United States, yeah, the United States spoiled it for themselves. So the opportunities that would have been beneficial to you prior to this even going down, the expansion of the Blue Water Navy, you can't use a sledgehammer just because everything you think is a nail. Every problem is a nail, so you think you're going to use a sledgehammer against it, and you can't just use a Blue Water Navy to attack other navies because you don't like the fact that they're expanding. That just doesn't work very well. Um,
Mm.
Any
Yeah,
other
man. I think
comments?
no,
Oh, go ahead.
I just think that I don't know, man. It's gonna be. I think it's best to I'm not worried about what they need to do, but I know for us, we need to start getting our stuff together, man. And I can see why it's very important to take hold of this opportunity we have as a people. As far as with Africa, I think that I think kind of like things are being opened up for us to make a way so we can move accordingly. So I think this is a great speak. I don't just I think it's great that we're speaking about this and you know letting people know what's really going on out here. But again, I think we need to start getting our stuff together and make moves, man, because it's like a sinking ship right now. That's what it looks like to me. As I'm reading more and just studying more, like it's sad to say, but U.S. is becoming like a sinking ship, So especially with who's in office right now. So that's my opinion.
Hmm.
yeah, absolutely.
All right. Let's go ahead. We got two more articles on the docket for tonight. Let's go ahead and get to our next article. Our, excuse me. Our next article comes from Axios.com. China foresees new Cold War with U.S. All right. A senior official from the State Council's Development Research Center is arguing that President Trump's trade war is part of a broader plan to contain China. We've actually read articles saying that in the past. Driving the news, the U.S. is expected to impose tariffs on another 200 billion of Chinese imports as soon as next week, Bloomberg reported yesterday, with no denial from Trump. The South China Morning Post summarized the commentary by Long Going Cheng, quote, with the U.S. labeling China as a strategic rival, Sino-U.S. relations will experience a deep structural change, he said. As two major powers, it is normal for China and the U.S. to engage in both cooperation and competition. We should abandon our illusions in facing the trade war, while at the same time remain rational and work hard to maintain overall stability. Excuse me. Long's commentary is the latest in a series of articles in People's Diet, the Daily, over the last month, apparently aimed at addressing growing skepticism over whether the Chinese economy will be able to weather the increasing pressure from Washington. China has changed from seeing this as, I feel like I read that wrong. China has changed from seeing this as primarily a trade conflict to now seeing it as part of a strategic competition, said Wang Yang, director of the Center of International Political Economy at Peking University. So now China is preparing for a prolonged battle and also for the worst case scenario of a new Cold War or even a hot war. End quote. That I believe that is the entire article right there. All right, so China foresees new Cold War with U.S. Um, can you explain this to us, Mike?
Yeah, as they begin to expand on the global scale, and as they begin to make their currency the reserve currency, the number one reserve currency, the United States isn't going to take a back seat to China. It's just not going to happen. That's not the way how um, white Americans operate from a cultural standpoint. They don't believe in being number two to anybody. I think if you watch the interview with Richard Spencer, um, he said it. He said it himself many times that they don't believe in equality; they believe in dominance. So what we're seeing now is that China is butting heads with the United States in terms of the global position that they want to take. You don't see Russia getting out of pocket because this works in their favor anyways. Anything that can minimize the U.S. presence on a global scale that allows them to prosper is beneficial to everybody else except the United States. So, um, will there be a new Cold War? Yeah, there'll be a break of relations at some point as Africa gets into the middle class, and you no longer need um, American dollars. You can use everybody else's dollar, especially the euro for that matter. The only reason China relies on America is because that's where all their goods are sold on a percentile level. High high amount of goods that come out of China get sold inside of America because the amount of wealth that is here to spend on it. So once America starts to decline, um, you'll probably see a closing of relations because anything further than that will lead to a military conflict, which will ensue, create a Cold War 2.0.
Now you said that China is trying to make their currency the reserve currency of the world or reserve currency.
Yeah, they tried that some years ago. I think that was under Obama administration. They pushed to have their currency be the reserve currency, which is their renminbi.
Mm, okay, okay. Any comments on this, Jack?
No, I'm good.
All right, you sure?
Nice.
All
Yeah,
right.
it's a lot, man. It's like it's deep. I'm just soaking it in. It's just a lot going on right now.
Hey, trust me, I was in a position a few months ago, and as the time goes, I learn and put I put two and two together myself, and as I read articles, things click. Not everything click, but some things click, and it continue to click as we go through with this. So, best thing I say is just, hey, continue with it, man.
Hmm.
All right, now this last article comes from New York Times. With ships and missiles, China is ready to challenge U.S. Navy in Pacific. Now, I understand this is a long article, um, so if it gets too long where we're losing our audience, you all stop me and we'll just paraphrase the rest of the article. Cool?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right. This one is written by Stephen Lee Myers on August 29th. In April, on the 69th anniversary of the founding of China's Navy, the country's first domestically built aircraft carrier stirred from its birth in the port city of Dalian in the Bohai Sea, tethered to tugboats for a test of its seaworthiness. China's first homegrown aircraft carrier just moved a bit, and the United States, Japan, and India squirmed. A military news website crowd referred to the three nations China views as its main rivals. Not long ago, such boats would have been dismissed as the bravado of a second string military. No longer. A modernization program focused on Navy and missile forces has shifted the balance of power in the Pacific in ways the United States and its allies are only beginning to digest. While China lags in projecting firepower on a global scale, it can now challenge American military supremacy in the places that matter most to it, the waters around Taiwan and in the disputed South China Sea. That means a growing section of the Pacific Ocean where the United States has operated unchallenged since the naval battles of World War II is once again contested territory, with Chinese warships and aircraft regularly bumping up against those of the United States and its allies. To prevail in these waters, according to officials and analysts who scrutinize Chinese military developments, China does not need a military that can defeat the United States outright, but merely one that can make intervention in the region too costly for Washington to contemplate. Many analysts say Beijing has already achieved that goal. To do so, it has developed anti access capabilities that use radar, satellites, and missiles to neutralize the decisive edge that America's powerful aircraft carrier strike groups have enjoyed. It is also rapidly expanding its naval forces with the goal of deploying a blue water navy that would allow it to defend its growing interests beyond its coastal waters. China is now capable of controlling the South China Sea in all scenarios short of war with the United States. The new commander of the United States Indo-Pacific Command, Admiral Philip S. Davidson, acknowledged in written remarks submitted during his Senate confirmation process in March. He described China as a peer competitor, gaining on the United States not by matching its forces weapons by weapons, but by building critical asymmetrical capabilities, including with anti-ship missiles in wi- in submarine warfare in submarine warfare. There is no guarantee that the United States would win a future conflict with China, he concluded. Last year, the Chinese Navy became the world's largest. Wow. With more warships and submarines than the United States, and it continues to build new ships at a stunning rate. Though the American fleet remains superior qualitatively, it is spread much thinner. The task to building a powerful navy has never been so urgent as it is today, President Xi Jinping declared in April as he presided over a naval procession off the southern Chinese island of Hainan that opened exercises involving 48 ships and submarines. The Ministry of National Defense said they were the largest since the People's Republic of China was founded in 1949. Even as the United States wages a trade war against China, Chinese warships and aircraft have picked up the pace of operations in the waters off Japan, Taiwan, and the islands, shoals, and reefs it has claimed in the South China Sea over the objections of Vietnam and the Philippines. When two American warships, the Higgins, a destroyer, and the Entertain, a cruiser, sailed within a few miles of disputed islands in the Paracels in May. Chinese vessels rushed to challenge what Beijing later denounced as a provocative act. China did the same to three Australian ships passing through the South China Sea in April. Only 3 years ago, Mr. Xi stood beside President Barack Obama in the Rose Garden and promised not to militarize artificial islands it has built farther south in the Spratly Archipelago. Chinese officials have since acknowledged deploying missiles there, but argue that they are necessary because American incursions in Chinese waters. When Defense Secretary Jim Mattis visited Beijing in June, Mr. Xi bluntly warned him that China would not yield even 1 inch of territory it claims as its own. Anti access aerial denial. China's naval expansion began in 2000 but accelerated sharply after Mr. Xi took command in 2013. He has drastically shifted the military's focus to naval as well as air and strategic rocket forces, while purging commanders accused of corruption and cutting the traditional land forces. The People's Liberation Army, the bedrock of communist powers since the revolution, has actually shrunk in order to free up resources for a more modern fighting force. Since 2015, the Army has cut 300,000 enlisted soldiers and officers, paring the military to 2 million personnel overall, compared with 1.4 million in the United States. While every branch of China armed forces lags behind the United States in firepower and experience, China has made significant gains in asymmetrical weaponry to blunt America's advantages. One focus has been in what American military planners call A2AD for anti access aerial denial, or what the Chinese call counterintervention. A centerpiece of this strategy is an arsenal of high speed ballistic missiles designed to strike moving ships. The latest versions, the DF 21D, and since 2016, the DF 26, are popularly known as carrier killers, since they can threaten the most powerful vessels in the American fleet long before they get close to China. The DF 26, which made its debut in a military parade in Beijing in 2015 and was tested in the Bohai Sea last year, has a range that would allow it to menace ships and bases as far away as Guam, according to the latest Pentagon report on the Chinese military released this month. These missiles are almost impossible to detect and intercept and are directed at moving targets by an increasingly sophisticated Chinese network of radar and satellites. China announced in April that the DF 26 had entered service. State television showed rocket launchers carrying 22 of them, though the number deployed now is unknown. A brigade equipped with them is reported to be based in Henan province in central China. Such missiles pose a particular challenge to American commanders because neutralizing them might require an attack deep inside Chinese territory, which would be a major escalation. The American Navy has never faced such a threat before, the Congressional Research Office warned in a report in May, adding that some analysts consider the missiles game changing. The carrier killers have been supplemented by the deployment this year of missiles in the South China Sea. The weaponry includes the new YJ-12B anti-ship cruise missiles, which puts most of the waters between the Philippines and Vietnam in range. While all-out war between China and the United States seems unthinkable, the Chinese military is preparing for a limited military conflict from the sea, according to a 2013 paper in a journal called The Science of Military Strategy. Lau Morris, an analyst with the RAND Corporation, said that China's deployment of missiles in the disputed Paracel and Spratly Islands will dramatically change how the U.S. military operates across Asia and Pacific and the Pacific. The best American response, he added, would be to find new and innovative methods of deploying ships outside the range. Given the longer range of the ballistic missiles, however, this is not possible. In most contingencies, the American Navy would be likely to face in Asia. Blue water ambitions. The aircraft carrier that put to sea, the aircraft carrier that put to sea in April for its first trials is China's second, but the first built domestically. It is the most prominent manifestation of a modernization project meant to propel the country into the upper tier of military powers. Only the United States, with 11 nuclear power carriers, operates more than one. A third Chinese carrier is under construction in a port called Shanghai, a port near Shanghai. Analysts believe China will eventually build five or six. The Chinese military traditionally focused on a repelling a land. The Chinese military traditionally focused on repelling a land invasion, increasingly aims to protect power into the blue waters of the world to protect China's expanding economic and diplomatic interests from the Pacific to the Atlantic. The carriers attract the most attention, but China's naval expansion has been far broader. The Chinese Navy, officially the People's Liberation Army Navy, has built more than 100 warships and submarines in the last decade alone, more than the entire naval fleets of all but a handful of nations. Last year, China also introduced the first of a new class of heavy cruisers, or superdestroyers, that, according to the American Office of Naval Intelligence, are comparable to, in many respects, to most modern Western warships. Two more were launched from dry dock in Dalian in July, the state meeting reported. Last year, China counted 317 warships and submarines in active service, compared to 283 in the United States Navy, which has been essentially unrivaled in the open seas since the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Unlike the Soviet Union, which drained its coffers during the Cold War arms race, military spending in China is a manageable percentage of a growing economy. Beijing's defense budget now ranks second only to the United States, 228 billion to 610 billion, according to estimates by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institution. The roots of China's focus on sea power and area denial can be traced to what many Chinese viewed as humiliation in 1995 and 1996, when Taiwan moved to hold its first democratic elections. China fired missiles near the island, prompting President Bill Clinton to dispatch two aircraft carriers to the region. We avoided the sea, took it at took it as a moat and a joyful little pond in the Middle Kingdom, a naval analyst, Ching Guang Kong, wrote recently in the official Navy newspaper. So not only did we lose all the advantages of the sea, but also our territories became the prey of the imperialist powers. China's naval buildup since then has been remarkable. In 1995, China built only three new submarines to begin replacing an older fleet that totaled 83. It now has nearly 60 new submarines and plans to expand to nearly 80, according to a report by the United States Congressional Research Service. Also, it has in its civilian economy excuse me, as it has in its civilian economy. China has bought or absorbed technologies from the rest of the world, in some cases illicitly. Much of its military hardware is of Soviet origin or modeled on antiquated Soviet designs, but with new but, but with new each wave of production, analysts say China is deploying more advanced capabilities. China's first aircraft carrier was originally launched by the Soviet Union in 1988 and left to rust when the nation collapsed 3 years later. Newly independent Ukraine sold it for 20 million to a Chinese investor who claimed it would become a floating casino, though he was really acting on behalf of Beijing, which refurbished the vessel and named it the Leonine. Am I still alive? Can you also hear me?
We can hear you.
All right. The second the second aircraft carrier is yet unnamed. It's largely based on the Leonine's designs, but it's reported to have enhanced technology. In February, the Chinese Shipbuilding Industry Corporation disclosed that it has plans to build nuclear powered carriers, which have far greater endurance than ones that require refueling stops. Excuse me. China's military has encountered some growing pains. It is hampered by corruption, which Mr. Xi has vowed to wipe out, and a lack of combat experience. As a fighting force, it remains untested by combat. In January, it was embarrassed when one of its most advanced submarines was detected as it neared disputed islands known as the Senkaku in Japan and the Diaoyu in China. The attack submarine should never have been spotted. The second aircraft carrier also appears to have experienced hiccups. Its first sea trials were announced in April and then inexplicably delayed. Not long after, the trials went ahead. In May, the general manager of China Shipbuilding was placed under investigation for serious violations of laws and discipline. The official Xinhua news agency reported without elaborating, defending its claims. China's military advances have nonetheless emboldened the country's leadership. The state media declared the carrier Leonine combat ready in the summer after it moved with six other warships through the Miyako Strait that splits Japan Ryukyu Islands and conducted its first flight operations in the Pacific. The Leonine's battle group now routinely circles Taiwan, total Chinese fighter jets and bombers. China's new J-20 stealth fighter conducted its first training mission excuse me, I apologize about that. China's new J-20 stealth fighter conducted its first training mission at sea in May, while its strategic bomber, the H-6, landed for the first time on woody islands in the Paracels. From the airfield there, from the airfield there, or from those in the Spratly Islands, the bombers could strike all of Southeast Asia. The recent Pentagon report noted that H-6 flights in the Pacific were intended to demonstrate the ability to strike American bases in Japan and South Korea, and as far away as Guam. Competition in the American way of saying it, says Li Ji, an analyst with the Chinese Naval Research Institute in Beijing. China is simply protecting its rights and its interests in the Pacific, and China's interests are expanding. In 2017, it opened its first overseas military base in Djibouti, on the Horn of Africa, saying that it will be used to support its participation in multinational anti piracy patrols off Somalia. It now appears to be planning to acquire access to a network of ports and bases throughout the Indian Ocean. Though ostensibly commercial, these projects have laid the groundwork for a necklace of refueling and resupplying arrangements that will facilitate Beijing's long range naval operations, according to a new report by C4ADS, a research organization in Washington. They soon will be able to they soon will be able, for example, to send a squadron of ships to somewhere, say in Africa, and have all the capabilities to make a landing and force to protect Chinese assets. said Vasily Kashin, an expert with the Institute of Far Eastern Studies of the Russian Academy of Science in Moscow. The need to drive home, the need was driven home in 2015 when Chinese warships evacuated 629 Chinese and 249 foreigners from Yemen when the country's civil war raided in Aden. When the country's civil war raged in Aden, a southern port city. One of the one of the frigates involved in the rescue, the Linyi, was featured in a patriotic blockbuster film, Operation Red Sea. The Chinese are going to be more present, Mr. Caution added, and everyone has to get used to it. Wow, that's a clean deck. Okay. Um, that was a long article, but very informational, very extremely informational. I didn't know that they. Well, I think I had, but truthfully, I didn't know that their navy was bigger than the United States. Of course, those numbers is only numbers that are made public. But per those numbers, I didn't know their navy was bigger than the United States. They have more ships and more submarines. It's very interesting. Of course, this article made one huge important statement that their navy is not tested, but nonetheless, um, it's impressive.
It is, and all the information that we've been talking about tonight and in prior hangouts is being mentioned in this article. Not that they listen to us, but they actually are coming to the same agreements that that Chinese military has to ramp up as they expand globally,
Hmm.
and part of the expansion includes military blue water navy expansion as well. So it's only a matter of time before they exceed the U.S. in terms of their capabilities. Because a lot of U.S. warships are actually older warships, right? They were built in,
Yeah, they are.
in our they don't have modern electronics, and in order for you to have your electronic warfare systems in place to be modernized, you have to take the ship out of commission temporarily. That could
Hmm.
take months if the
Years. It could take
software is not.
years. It could take years.
It could take years.
Yeah.
Ooh, while U.S. has some very robust warships, even look at the Nimowitz. I think that's the name of it.
The Nimitz. And
The new
the
stealth
yeah.
the stealth frigate that they have. That thing has so many problems they don't even use it. It's just like the F-35. The F-35 has so many bugs in it that it's not very usable all that much. And we saw recently Syria was actually able to shoot one of them down. So, and that's with old Soviet hardware.
Mm, wow.
Um,
Yeah. Go on,
go ahead,
Jack.
bro.
Go
Go ahead.
ahead, Jack. No,
Um,
I read for 10 minutes. You go ahead. It
yeah, I know that was a long article, but
was very
very
good.
informative, man. It dropped when I read that, I was like, I couldn't really like put it down, man. I was like glued to it. But two things, the main points I got out of it is number one, um, it made me take a second look at Chinese um military strategy in regards to asymmetrical warfare. Um, I don't know too much about it from what my research was, as far as I think it ties in more with the ships, right? As far as shooting from not so much on foot, but more like from the water, right? Shooting rockets to certain cities. Good night, baby. Shooting rockets to certain cities or destroying certain ships. Is that what asymmetrical warfare is? Because I'm not too abreast on that.
Well, asymmetrical just means one to many, right? So you have two. Your adversary has more resources than you do, so you figure out how to take it down. How to
Okay.
take down the resources by using the bare minimum that you have. So in this case, China has a lot of cyber warfare capabilities, including the Russians as well. The Russians have a lot of cyber warfare capabilities to take down, missile attacks and as well as scramble communications on the warship. They've done that several times. There's a famous video of a Russian MiG fighter jet strafing a U.S. Navy warship in the Black Sea. This was about a couple of years ago. It strafed it about 12 times because it was inside what it considered to be territorial waters of Russia. So the U.S. warship actually couldn't respond by fire. It couldn't activate its missile systems because the MiG fighter jet had electronic warfare capabilities built into it,
Mm.
it strafed back and forth 12 times, very very closely to that warship, and basically disabled it. It was
Mm.
just a floating iron piece of junk in the water.
Okay. So, from what I'm taking out of that is, uh, to me, China is very capable. I guess there's a quote in there that's saying that they're a peer competitor. So what I took out of that was they pretty much stand next to neck by neck. I think what I foresee from this is in the future, China's going to continue to put out more ships, more submarines, which in return will um, cause U.S. probably to put more sanctions on them because it helped. This article helped me to understand why Trump is going so hard on sanctions and wanting to kind of bring China to its knees. Like you would say, because sometime in the future they're gonna have more power to them as far as out in the seas, which I think pretty much gonna be able to surround the United States if they continue to build relationships in Africa. And if they were to build relationships in West Africa, they'd be able to put ships on outside their coast, which I see in the future. So I kind of see where it's going, um, and I can see why Trump is trying so hard to put sanctions to hurt them financially, economically, but in return, what's going to hurt us. So it kind of makes sense. The second thing I got out of that as well is um, their technology, as far as the capability, as far as how far these rockets can shoot. Um, they can shoot a far distance, man. So I think that they're going to surpass America in the near future, as far as naval force. This is more to me. This is more of a inkling to me to like to say like America needs to build relationships. They need to correct the relationships. They need to repair these relationships they have with certain countries because they're gonna get surpassed, man. They're gonna get blown out the water in the sense of you know military power, finances. I'm sorry, economic growth. They're gonna get pushed out the way. So I think America really needs to build relationships and cultivate certain relationships with certain nations and kind of humble themselves because how are things look? They're literally letting you know right now. This matter of fact, doesn't New York Times. They're letting you know like, hey, China is going to surpass us. So they need to repair relationships and go from there.
They well, that would be the optimal idea, right? But they pretty much burned all their bridges.
Hmm.
They burned a lot of bridges. Even in regards to Europe. Europe doesn't want to do any business with the United States anymore. If you're going to put sanctions on them, if you're going to put tariffs on them, what kind of friends are that? What kind of friends are those? If you're putting tariffs on your friends, where you're telling them not only do they have to wipe their feet before they come in the house, they also have to come in with barefoot. Like that's not fair. If you're trampling around their house with your big Timberland boots on, that's not right.
Hmm. So I think you're saying that their cockiness is hindering them from far as their international relationships. The cockiness, their back. It's kind of more of a backwards thing because they do certain things that I look at them like certain moves they make. I'm like, it's like they're looking at things very short sighted. And I look at the long term. It's like now, and maybe it should coin
let's make America great again now. You know what I'm saying? Not so much in the future. It's like they're doing these things now to make America great, but in the long term, I think what's happening is they're literally hurting themselves. They're shooting themselves in the foot. Um, what do you foresee as far as their military growth? What do you foresee as far as China?
They're gonna partner up with Russia no matter what.
Hmm.
They need Russia, and Russia needs China. So you're gonna see a lot of shared technologies, a lot of shared. I mean, right now, I think on September 8th, there's going to be some war games between um, Russia and China in the Pacific as a strategy of how to take the Pacific back. So
Hmm.
you take China's Blue Water Navy and you match that up with Russia's Blue Water Navy. Because keep in mind, a lot of people forget that Russia has at least one third of the Pacific too.
Yeah.
So they have a vested interest in making sure that there's safe passages throughout the Pacific in terms of dealing with the United States because they're only about 20 to 25 minutes away from Alaska. I think just flying. So there's there's a vested interest in making sure that Russia has the ability to get out of their waters and not be confronted by the United States. Um, so the expansion of China and the expansion and the adoption of Russia on as a partner, as a strategic partner, um, just expands the whole entire blue water operation. If the United States really was so concerned about, you know, making amends with other countries, they wouldn't keep those countries down. You don't see China or even Russia, for that matter, keeping other countries down that they consider to be their partners.
I noticed that. Yeah.
China has built tremendous amounts of infrastructure in the last 5 years. They have a new spaceport inside. I think it's in Argentina. I think if I remember correctly, it's either
Hmm.
Argentina or Peru. I think. But the point of the matter here is that that's their other jump off point. South America is their other jump off point. Um, Africa is their main jump off point.
Hmm.
There's even discussions about um, buying up ports from Greece because Greece needs the money, um,
Shit. Sorry.
and Greece
My
is
bad.
willing to sell. So
That's major
Damn.
right there.
That's crazy, man. Yo, it's like, geez, man. They're steady mobbing, man. They're moving, man. They're making moves, and now I'm just seeing how they're moving right now. They've been kind of been doing a covert warfare as far as gathering intelligence since like maybe since like years ago, man. They hadn't been doing it since like the 70s or 60s, man. Because they like 50 years ago they were like a poor country. So it's like,
they
how did they
lifted
do it so fast?
they lifted 100 million people out of poverty since 1979.
Mm,
That's the black community in America twice.
damn.
That's how they built
Well,
their middle class. They made sure they educated their people, improved early education, so that they have enough electrical engineers, electronics, computer engineers. Um, they've also moved people. They've also moved people out of the ghettos inside China and moved them into more urban environments. So now people have a better quality of life. These are things that white America has not really done for African Americans, right? So
Mm,
basically, if African Americans, you're told to pull yourself up by your bootstrap, whereas China says, I got a whole gag of boots for you and the
mm,
laces to go with it, and I'll lace them up for you, right?
mm,
So they lifted their people out of poverty. Same thing in Venezuela. Chavez, when he came into power in 2000, lifted five, if not 10 million Venezuelans out of poverty in less than 5 years. These are things that people do in other countries, but for whatever reason, white people in America don't feel that that's necessary when it comes to African Americans. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because what you could have done with Africa um, is you could have taken your up and coming millennial blacks and moved and used them as ambassadors throughout Africa in order to have that sort of control. If you wanted to have that, make an amends, so to speak, and making amends with African countries and pull them away from European countries, you could have easily done that. But China came in and said, "There's no infrastructure. What are we doing here?" And basically started building bridges, roads, and railways, and airports and hospitals. These are things that the United States hasn't done yet, or doesn't even have any intentions of doing. Right? So they take the wealth from, they take the resources from places like Haiti, places like China, places like Africa, and then bring all those resources back, and then leave the country, high and dry. Which is why Africa is so far behind in modernization, because you robbed them of all their resources, and now that somebody else is coming in to do what you should have done, you're on the outside telling them that not to trust the Chinese. Well, who can trust you?
Mm. It's funny, man. I saw a video. I think it was I think she was British foreign minister. She's like dancing in Africa. I'm like, they're trying to do whatever to get back in there, and but it's too far gone. But I think a learning lesson from this is, as far as China is, your biggest resources are your people. That's your biggest resources. When you think guns or military is your bigger resources, or your authorities are biggest resources, no. Or money, no. It's the people, because as one whole unit, they rose to power, man, fast. And I think that's a learning lesson. And I think as far as United States, what they did, a learning lesson from that is um, racism and uh, a need to control others and your ego will destroy you. And it literally destroyed them as a nation. So um, these are great learning lessons. It's great to see history unfolding and see how it played out. And this is stuff that our kids are going to be able to learn from, and hopefully, you know, other countries learn from this, man, because that was amazing, man. Like, to see that showed me the mindset of the Chinese is, they're very focused on unifying each other. They have to be they realize there's more strength in unification of each other. So that's a great learning lesson to see how things are progressing. And it's great to see that the Chinese is working in Africa. Um, yeah, man, it's pretty deep.
Well, they tried to get into Haiti after the earthquake, and the
Really,
United States blocked them.
really.
Yeah, they blocked them because they were going to buy up Haiti's debt, and actually, I think they were going to rebuild the hospitals and all that stuff inside Haiti, and the United States basically put a block on them.
Wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Wow,
China had the money; they were ready to go. So
bruh, that right there makes that bothers me, man. That really like gave me anger right now. That's crazy. I didn't know that. I didn't know that,
yeah,
man.
and that's why they have the biggest embassy inside Haiti. Their biggest embassy in the world is practically in Haiti, and they have no intention on lifting Haitians out of poverty, but they want to put their foot on their neck. So
Mm,
when somebody like Hillary Clinton tries to come down there, or when Francis Hollande from France tries to come down there, the Haitians are throwing eggs at you because they know you're a fraud. They're not
bro,
stupid. They know you're a fraud.
I didn't get a chance to go back over there but I was actually gonna go right before the earthquake, and then the earthquake happened, so I didn't go. But my cousins went over there, and I got friends that went over there, and they're telling me like, man, that whole foundation didn't build anything in Port-au-Prince, bro. Like, I think they built like a few houses. It's still out of all the other cities, Port-au-Prince is still is in shambles. And the Clinton Foundation didn't build anything, bro. They built like two or three houses, and it's
They robbed.
they robbed them,
They
man.
robbed them.
And I'm telling you, bro, it's like why everybody hates all the Haitians right now. They hate the Clintons, bro. They hate them because it's like you literally robbed us of our chance to pretty much rebuild ourselves up, man. And people are still struggling out there, and that's frustrating, man. That really got me pissed off right now. I didn't
Well,
know
they
that.
tried to use the Canadians. They tried to use the Canadians to rule because French the French portions of Canada, which would be Quebec, they tried to use Quebec as a means of leverage to get inside Haiti politically, and that didn't work either. So what Europeans need to understand is that you're pretty much isolated at this point.
Pretty
You can't
much.
really you really don't have any friends with people that don't look like you because you mistreated people from the last 500 years, and people remember all that stuff. You can't erase history. So what's happening now is, if push comes to shove, probably in the next few years, um, you'll probably see China make a play to Benin and Togo to provide assistance to somewhere like Haiti in order to move them away from the United States. Because the whole objective was to get Haiti into the African Union. And the United
Yeah.
States has been blocking that, just like they blocked the Chinese from getting in as well. So Chinese owns Jamaica right now as it stands. They pretty much bought all their debt. So if 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 that was the case, that they wanted to come into Haiti and do the same thing to Haiti, what they did to Jamaica. Jamaica is a thriving island right now. New hospitals, new roads, new universities, um, new ports being built, all types of infrastructure development. But you don't see the same thing happening in Haiti because the United States is blocking a lot of that stuff. Whereas in Jamaica, they couldn't really do something like that. And the Dominican Republic is complicit in working with the CIA and SOCOM, which is U.S. Southern Command, and keeping Haiti down. And robbing them of their resources as well as moving the country's boundaries, where what you see on Google Maps is starting to be pushed further and further to the west, because they're gobbling up the territory to try to get the resources out of Haiti, because Haiti has a lot of gold stuck in the ground, as well as iridium, which is what the Dominicans want.
Mm.
Well, not the Dominicans, but the oligarchs want that. But they're using the Dominican Republic as a way to get inside.
Mm. Damn, bro. This
Price deep, ain't it?
I don't know, man. Like, all I say is this, man. Karma is a B, bro, and that's what's going on right now. That's why they're scrambling and doing what they're doing now, and trying to they can't do anything, and it's crazy, man. I think it's best for us as people to make moves, man. We need to start making moves, and because there's no point. There's no point, man. Trying to hold on to this.
Right. I agree with you 100%. And I think that expanding our operations from a business standpoint
Hmm.
is more sensible, rather than to try to. You're not going to take on the U.S. military as Black Americans or even
No,
Africans for that matter. It's just not.
I wouldn't.
It's not
I
worth
would.
it, right? It's not worth getting into a shooting battle,
Yeah.
with a juggernaut. It just doesn't make any sense. You rather put your resources into places where it's going to matter. And I don't foresee, um, our resources being well spent here when it could be spent in other places, especially places like Syria that need the reconstruction investment, where we can provide some of these ideas that we've been talking about offline into their environment, and actually have some digital real estate as well as physical real estate on the ground.
Mm, that's
Makes
deep.
sense.
What's your thoughts, Lionel, man? I know you just listening, man. What's your thoughts on everything, brother?
My thoughts are simple. This is like Mike said, as you expanding interest, you need a way to protect your interests, because people are going to protect it. And the people that's listening to this, and I got to stop saying, and the people that are listening to this that don't fully understand it, the best way for me to equate it is to think about geopolitics is a macro um, version of everyday life in your community. I
Mm.
understand black men say the hood, but in your community, people are going to try to try you. Those are the powerful people in your community. Geopolitics is a larger version of that. You have interest here, you have interest there. People are going to try your interests, going to try to take over what you have, your territories, the land. So you need a way to protect that, to protect your business, protect your country's interest, the government interest. So that's what the military is for. When Mike said the Pearl Harbor bombing, a lot of Americans think like, oh, Japan just did that. Oh, those Japs, they just did that because they're heartless people. No, that happened because their way of income was jeopardized, so they need to retaliate. People just don't do nothing because it's a reason, and that those reasons are not known, are not told. So when a lot of times when people say, "Oh, love conquers all," to me, that's that tells me that they do not know the depth and the breadth of what's going on in these geopolitical airwaves. When they say, "Oh, this don't matter, love conquer this," no, love see no color or none, things like that. It that's very extremely superficial. That's an extremely superficial statement. And when you talk to these people, don't debate them, don't argue. When you talk to them and you let them know, well, this is what's going on, this, they're going to lose the argument, and it's deeper than what a lot of people may think.
That's true, man.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, just one more
Go
thing.
ahead,
I
Jack.
saw a video complex sent around about China's soft power in Kenya, and a black guy, black Kenyan, he was wooed just by karate movies and food, and how he's saying, "Oh, the Chinese are good. They're look, they're here talking to us, they're building this and that." He can't see the forest through the he can't see the trees through the forest. He can't see China is taking over and stealing their land, stealing their resources. He can't see that. He's so enamored with Chinese and speaking Mandarin and going to a Chinese school because he deems that better than African. What deems that better than African. And when people think like that, they're going to serve you up on a dish to your enemies.
Well, you know, the United States is notorious for doing the same exact thing. They
Yeah,
sold
I agree.
Hollywood to a lot of people, and people drank the Kool Aid too. So it's not so much just the soft power in Kenya. The Chinese are using soft power everywhere. Um, they say
I
that
was
the
just
white
using
man's
it as
ice
an
is
example.
colder, but I know what you're saying because I saw that video as well. But people say that the white man's ice is colder, but
Mm.
maybe they think the Chinese duck sauce is sweeter or something. But that's typical. If you're going to do a takeover, you're going to do it from a soft perspective. That's why the United States started using the NBA, started sending the Dream Team in 1992. They assembled that to send them all around the world to go play in the on a global scale. You see them using the NFL, playing in London. The same thing with the what you call
M-
it, the
MLB in Puerto Rico.
yeah, MLB in places like Dominican Republic. That's the sort of soft power that they use, and people gravitate towards that. It's just one of those things where if they don't have anything else to latch upon to, because your nation state isn't doing much, right? There is no label that I'm buying. I mean, a product that I'm buying that has a label on the back of it that says "Made in Africa" or "Made in Kenya," "Made in Egypt," "Made in Botswana." It doesn't say that on it, so I have no way of actually connecting with the people or connecting with the nation state if you're not pushing the brand. Image is everything, so you got to push that brand. And a part of what I try to do on the Black Brain Trust is try to push the agenda and not get people jobs. I'm not about getting jobs. It's about creating opportunities for yourself and being more self-empowered.
Agreed.
That's true, man. I think ours of that is that you're 100% correct, man. Because right now, it's all about this. So like I'm realizing this far as geopolitics, they help me to realize how much opportunities is available for people there, man. There's so many opportunities, and I think that people just don't know. Because, bro, I'll read these articles, and I'll literally go talk to people and bring things up to see what they know. It's like it's a smart. Like I haven't found one person yet that like is like abreast of like what's going on out here. You know, they might know a few things, but they don't know everything, and they have like no clue what they're talking about. And which shows me two things. No, it just shows me, oh yeah, two things. Number one, um, they're probably being bombarded with entertainment and the culture, and they don't really push current affairs and things are going on with international relations because they don't push that in the news. And second thing is people are caught up in this whole American dream thing, like it's gonna last, like it's still gonna be there, you know. And in actuality, how things are looking is pretty much not gonna be there, you know. So I saw a interview right with one of the senior analysts for economic analysis for bankrate.com on Fox Business News, and he was discussing as far as the economy how you know a number of economists don't see going to start seeing um, the economy starting to slow down next 2 years, and he's giving facts. And in the same, it's weird because it's how Fox react. In the same breath, the ladies want to argue with him, talking about you're not giving us any facts, you're not showing anything true. We have 4% growth. She keeps saying 4% growth, but it's like they kind of want to keep people dumb and not know what's going on out here. And he's like, he's like, yo, these facts are here. Everybody's agreeing on what's that thing's gonna slow down. You know, so it showed me there that um, they're pushing to keep people dumb. They don't want people to know what's really going on out here. And those people who do know what's going out there,
You're
have a
isolated.
yeah, yeah, pretty much. You're not, you know, that's why it's great that we have over here, we have here right now, because especially as people who look like me, who's knowledge on what's really going on out here, you know. So I think this is a blessing.
Mm. Any other comments?
Yeah, yeah. This is open mic, right? So I just wanted to
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I put a link in the group chat because earlier we were referring to uh, India buying missiles from Russia, but China tried to approach Turkey with a similar setup, and it's called the Chinese HQ-9. It's similar to the S-300 or S-400 missile surface-to-air missile system.
Okay, I see it right now. Breaking news. This is from YouTube Mania. Breaking news: China deployed HQ-9 air defense system in South China Sea.
Hmm. So when it comes to air defense missiles, right? Um, how accurate are those?
Right, about 90%.
Mm,
That's pretty accurate.
okay.
Is
If
is
you're
that
referring if
included?
you're referring to the Russians, if you're referring to the Russians S-400 system, yeah, it's about 93% accurate.
Hmm.
Does that include the proximity explosion? That 90%?
Um,
You're
yeah,
not
it's about
sure.
that much.
Okay.
It's about that much. If you look at the Tor M2 as well, the Russian Tor M2, that's about 99% accurate. It can hit a tennis
Uh,
ball.
What?
yeah.
Nah,
Yeah,
that's crazy.
that's the most accurate system they have in well, I wouldn't say it's the most accurate, but it's one of the most accurate, cost-effective systems that they have for missile deterrence.
Hmm.
Um, the S-500, which is the Prometheus that they've deployed in Russia, um, won't be available on the global market until for at least 2025. That's even more accurate.
Mm. And let's say on a certain warship, right? How many rockets do those ships hold? Like they probably hold. How many missiles do they hold? Like a couple, few hundred, or 50s, 20s? Like how many rockets do they keep on a ship?
Lionel can give you a better description. Of that. He's an old Navy guy, but I think the destroyers carry at least 90 cells, which is 90
Mm.
missiles
Yeah,
each.
they
And you got a dozen of those warships too.
Mm.
yeah, it's I'm a sub guy, but I've been on the carrier for 6 months, and they got, because it's not just the carrier. You know, it's not gonna travel alone. There's other ships that travel with it, travel in groups. Oh man, you're okay. You're not gonna know the specific answer
Mm-hmm.
because obviously, but
There's
it's
a
a lot,
lot.
man. It's a lot. Like I was shocked to know the Marines had fighter jets, and they had a lot of them down there in the hangar bay.
Mm. When you were in the Navy, right? As far as war games, did they practice like, a lot of scenarios that was kind of like, okay, if we were going against like China, like was it like kind of like that's how they went into it? Like,
I didn't experience any war games.
okay, okay. But how about the drills? Were the drills like that?
Well, I was on submarines more frequently, and a lot of the surface ships do more of the war games.
Okay,
Even though there are submarines that travel with them in packs, but
okay.
more surface ships partake in war games.
Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah, I think we can get in. I brought this up before, but I think that military industrial complex is a market that we should be invested into. I don't see why not. It's not going anywhere anytime soon, and it's going to be very beneficial for getting involved in. I saw a video of South Africa. There's an all-black woman um, military company. Basically, they make radars and what do you call it? Communication systems for militaries. So and they sell this stuff around the world.
I gotta ask you, Mike. So how do we do that? How does one start a military? I look at Lockheed Martin, all these companies. I'm like, how like you got to get like a team of engineers and get the right computers and come up with a design for a certain. I don't know how would you start your own company?
Well, we have to find out what do nation states need for security, right? So we
Okay.
look at Africa and we look at what's happening with Al Shabaab and some of these other threat actors such as Boko Haram. There's a lot of key areas that many African countries can't afford to buy American hardware, and so
Hmm.
they end up buying Chinese hardware, right? So because it's too expensive, and Chinese hardware is cheap, but you get what you pay for when it comes to military hardware. So when you have tanks that are stalling on the battlefield because they were cheaply made, or you have helicopters that are dropping out of the sky because you know the engine was has malfunctioned. Uh, these are things that matter because you want a return on your investment. I saw something about a single seat fighter jet fell out of the sky too that they bought from China. Just a lot of cheap goods. It doesn't have to be that way, right? We can come in, with some of these ex-military guys who got security clearances, who have the ability to travel in and out of the country undetected, and you know, and have that experience in terms of the military jargon,
Mhm.
apparatus, and things like that. We would need to lean on those guys for contracting capabilities,
Hmm.
especially when you're talking about exporting hardware outside of the United States. Unless you plan on establishing your firms outside the United States, in places that avoids tax havens, or taxations of the United States government, such as the IRS. So, how I would approach that is I would find as many black military vets, who are online, and sit them down in a room and say, how do we take advantage of this? What do African countries need? What do Latin American countries need? Um, we take F-450 chassis from Ford, or even from Chrysler. Take those big Dodge Ram pickup truck chassis, and start making armored cars on them, and start shipping them out. And then we worry about what kind of uh, 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 machinery we want to put on the back of it, whether it's surface air missiles, or it's 12.7 millimeter guns on them. Figure out something from that point, right? So many African countries have a problem building equipment because they don't have enough engineers out there, because they have a literacy problem out there. A lot of people can't read, especially they have a grown millennial class who can't read. So they end up going to Europe. They end up traveling to Europe through the Mediterranean, taking a risk by on these rubber boats that can sink, and they go into Europe and they get sold into the slave trade in Europe, and they're out there on their own. So Africa has a need for highly intelligent, highly functional black people, as well as a need for infrastructure, as well as military.
That's real, man. That's real.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a shame to see so many black men go into the military and then come out, and then they can tell you about their experience, but they can't really put their experience into action. I'm an IT person by trade, so everything that I speak about and try to connect the dots to comes from my IT background. So I'm always looking at things from a technical perspective, because I'm a technical person. So.
So let's say you got everything set up, right? And you take a trip to one of these countries. So what you would speak with when they're like their representatives, and they'll introduce you to certain government officials, and then you'll do a presentation like, hey, I have these amount of cars, or these amount of armored cars. Let me do a demonstration, and you go from there. Name your price, and then they decide they want to get it or not, or that's usually how it works, or is there more to it?
You go to a military expo. There's several military expos that happens throughout the year. If you look at something called Jane's IHS, or you look up Army Recognition on YouTube, they do weekly, if not bi-weekly, reviews of these military expos and what kind of hardware is being sent out there. I think we did a hangout before where there were these robots that were being deployed, these tanks. That had artificial intelligence, and they had these guns on them, basically for border security, where they could take down people coming across the border without having a full battle tank in place. It's just basically a robot with treads and a heavy machine gun on there that can take down a vehicle if it needed to. But they do have military expos that you can go display at. You just got to go sign up. And that's where we come in. You're not, in terms of doing business, you're not going to make anything less than $5 million. It's almost guaranteed you're going to sell something. So everybody needs something.
Damn, bro, I didn't think it was like that. But it's like, shoot, why not do it? It's there. Like, you just need one. If you have one, you create something, you get your first sale, you already know you sell one and have good reviews on it, other countries gonna buy, and then you just improve upon that. You're talking about, $100 million company right there.
Absolutely, because it's contracts. You got to remember that you're not just selling a piece of hardware and then that's the end of it. There has to be some kind of warranty agreements with it. training agreements, documentation, um, logistics access. You know, people they need to buy parts for it. The parts need to be replaced. Keep in mind that not companies, countries keep military hardware for a relatively long time. If you look at Syria right now, a lot of their tanks are T-55 tanks. Those tanks are from the 1950s.
What? Wow, I didn't know that. So you just make it killing off the
Yeah,
parts on that.
well, you buy, yeah, right. They buy an excess amount of logistics because you have 2,000 tanks. So it's just a matter of keeping those tanks up, right? And the ones that can't be kept up, you know, you just kind of scrap them, right? But
Mm.
the um the point I'm making is that countries that are not first world powers hold on to their hardware for a very very long time.
Mm.
Even you know, again, Syria still uses MiG-23 fighter jets. Those things were made in the 1960s.
Wow, I didn't know that.
All right. Um, any anything else?
Hey, what's going on, Christian?
Oh, what's going on? How you doing?
What's up, Christian?
Doing all right. How's everybody doing?
Good.
Hanging in.
Good.
Any other points to be made? No. All right. Well, don't forget to come back Friday for our economics hangout. Same time. Um, good show Friday, as always, all the time here. Any other comments before we shut this down?
I'm good.
All right. With that said, thank y'all for visiting and talk to you later.